In this episode, we talk about a recently released report by the World Health Organization on malaria and what it says about India. We also give you an update on Maldives' request to India about removing its military personnel from the island nation. But first, we talk about Mizoram. Hi, I'm Utsa Sarmin, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Yesterday, the Zoram People's Movement, or ZPM, secured a victory in Mizoram by defeating the incumbent Mizo National Front. Now, what makes this particularly interesting is that it marks the first time that the ZPM contested the elections as a recognized political party. And this will also be the first time in decades where the state will see a new party in power and a new chief minister. Since the creation of Mizoram in 1987, the state's political landscape has largely been dominated by two parties, the Congress and the MNF. From 1993, the chief ministership of the state alternated between the Congress's Lalthanhawla and the MNF's Zoram. But now, Laldu Homa, the 73-year-old leader of ZPM, is set to become the chief minister of the state. To know more about the results, we speak to the Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah in this segment. So, Sukrita, for decades, the Congress and the MNF were the only parties that managed to be in power in the state. But that changed this year because of ZPM. Could you tell us about the origins of the party?
So it's the first time that the ZPM contested as a recognized party. Okay, so this is the first time that Mizoram has had kind of a viable third front that it can vote for. And for decades, like you said, there's just been the Congress and the MNF, which are like the grand old parties of Mizoram. So there have been smaller regional parties in the past. In fact, the ZPM's chief ministerial face, Mr. Laldu Homa, he himself has founded several small regional parties in the past. However, in 2017, 6 such small regional parties and civil society organizations kind of came together and formed a coalition, and which they called the Zoram People's Movement. But when the last elections took place in 2018, it wasn't yet a recognized political party. So what they did instead was lend their backing to 38 independent candidates. Mizoram has 40 seats. So as a loose formation of this kind, in 2018 itself, the ZPM established itself as the largest opposition party. It won 8 seats out of 40, as opposed to the MNF, which had won 26 seats. So, even before it was a fully formed entity, it had actually performed really well. And in the last 5 years, it has kind of gone on establishing itself. And in 2019, it was formally recognized as a political party. And after that, Laldu Homa, who was elected as an MLA last time as well and is the prospective CM now, he was disqualified from the assembly on grounds that he defected. Though he was elected as an independent, he was kind of been campaigning or, he was a part of the ZPM. He was disqualified from the assembly as a defector. Now, because of this, there was a by-election that was held in Sarchip, which is his constituency, and he once again had a commanding victory from that seat. So that really signaled the arrival of the party, and earlier this year, it won the Lunglei Municipal Council, which is like elections, which was a big deal. Lunglei is the second largest town in Mizoram. So in that way, it has been around for the last couple of years. But like you said, this was the first election in which it contested as a full-fledged party. It contested in all 40 seats. From the beginning, it said that Laldu Homa is our chief ministerial face. And it delivered this commanding victory. It's won 27 out of 40 seats. And it has emerged as a giant killer because their candidate defeated incumbent chief minister Zoram. Several ministers have been defeated by ZPM candidates. So it's a very comprehensive victory for this new regional party.
And so what factors would you say led to such a comprehensive win this time?
So there has been decades of anti-incumbency piling up in Mizoram. Since the state was formed in 1987, there has only been the Congress and the MNF in power. It's been this rigid duopoly between the two, and elections have largely been shaped by anti-incumbency. So there would be, say, 2 terms of the Congress in power, and then they would be comprehensively defeated. And like the voting out would be like this, that so strong would be the wave of anti-incumbency that the chief minister would also be voted out of power, which is what we're seeing this time as well. So that same pattern that we've been seeing all all along in Mizoram has been replicated this time. This time is no different. What is different is that there was a viable third front and the people voted this new party to power. And the ZPM has been really banking on this image of being a new party, right? So they keep talking about bringing in a new system. They emphasize that a lot of their candidates are newcomers to politics, that a lot of their candidates are young candidates who are below the age of 40. They have young local celebrities, gospel singers, footballers, and so on. So they've kind of been really trying to play up this image of newness and freshness, which seems to have worked in its favor.
And we understand this was quite different from MNF's poll plank, which was largely based on Mizo nationalism. Could you talk about that aspect and where did the party go wrong?
Right. So in the last couple of years, there have been a number of developments which have affected the larger Chin Kuki-Zo community, which includes the Mizos, right? Such as the fleeing of the Chin people from Myanmar to Mizoram. They are of the same ethnic group as the Mizos. Then the Manipur conflict, in which the Kukis, who are of the same ethnicity again, have been in conflict with the Meiteis. So Zoram Thanga had kind of been molding himself as this pan-Zo leader and, been really vocally speaking in support of the Chin refugees, of the Kuki-Zomis in Manipur, and, been taking in refugees and really standing up to the central government also to lend his support. So, in my conversations with MNF leaders, they were very confident, while they would claim that they've done such and such development work. But at the end of the day, they were really relying heavily on this champion of Mizo nationalist image. And they would admit frankly that, this is what is going to help us win. We helped our brethren and the people are grateful to us for it. However, what the ZPM has also been pushing at is that no Mizo party thinks otherwise. We are all on the same boat when it comes to the question of our Zo brethren. So they were trying to say that this is not the exclusive domain of the MNF. And the ZPM has also been strongly emphasizing its Mizo identity. In the past, Laldu Homa has also spoken about a Zo unification. That means the unification of all areas in which the Zo people are in majority, which includes the Kuki areas of Manipur. So it has also been talking about these kind of things. So, what ZPM was saying has come true in that, the MNF has not been able to successfully claim that it alone is a champion of Mizo identity and Mizo nationalism. In fact, interestingly, so the MNF is set to win just 10 seats out of 40. And 2 of those seats are seats in which the ethnic minority Chakmas are dominant. So 2 out of 10 seats in which the MNF are winning are actually not Mizo seats per se. So that kind of space of Mizo identity and of Mizo voters have more or less been taken up by the ZPM now as the new regional voice.
And now coming to the Congress, this is the second time they have suffered such a setback in the state. What do you think it means for the party there?
I mean, this is not the first northeastern state where this is happening. State after state, the Congress is kind of being relegated to a smaller and smaller position for so many years, right? This was a Congress bastion of sorts. When they lost in 2018, it was said that the Congress has lost its last bastion in the northeast. And they did try to make a comeback, but a number of forces have worked against it. And now it's set to win just 1 seat, making it its worst ever performance. So it's going to be really difficult for the Congress at this point of time.
Right, and what about the BJP? We understand that the Congress's campaign was heavily centered on an anti-BJP plank, especially regarding the ethnic conflict in Manipur. But despite that, the BJP has managed to win 2 seats in Mizoram. So what would you say this signifies?
So with this, the BJP is winning 2 seats in Mizoram. This is expanding its footprint in Mizoram. In 2018, it had won its first ever seat, ever. It had won in Tuichong, which is the Chakma majority seat. This time as well, the 2 seats in which the BJP are winning are seats in which the decisive voters are those from ethnic minorities. So, the BJP has been battling a really negative image in the state. First, as, a Hindu party, which is perceived to be anti-Christian. And secondly, because of the ethnic conflict in Manipur, where the Biren Singh-led government, which is a BJP government, is seen to be completely in favor of the Meitei community. So it was battling these factors. And what it has done is sidestepped it completely, right? Because the BJP contested in just 23 out of 40 seats. So it didn't put up a full fight in the state. Instead, what it did was completely focus its energies on these seats where the ethnic minority voters play a decisive role, because it knew that it will not be able to make inroads among the Christian Mizos. So it played its cards in that way, and it seems to have yielded some kind of dividends for it. And yes, it registers a growth in the state, but not yet making any inroads amongst the Christian Mizos.
Right, so now Sukrita, ZPM's Laldu Homa is set to become the chief minister. Can you briefly tell us about him and his rise in the state?
So, Laldu Homa has had a very long public life. He has been an IPS officer, in fact, a very prominent IPS officer. He was in charge of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's security. He resigned in 1984, before her death, and he left the IPS to join politics. He was a part of the Congress, and when he eventually left the Congress, he was the first ever MP to be disqualified under the anti-defection law. Okay, so, and then since then he's been involved in state politics. Like I said, he's dabbled. He's also been a part of the MNF. He's formed these smaller regional outfits, and he's basically tried on a number of different shoes, and this one seems to have fit where, the ZPM is essentially a coming together of different outfits. So this seems to be a formula which has finally worked for Laldu Homa.
And Sukrita, could you also talk a bit about the significance of a new party like ZPM winning their first elections? How does it change the electoral landscape of the state?
So ZPM's win essentially is it's a new regional voice, not just from Mizoram, but for the Northeast. Keep in mind that the Northeast is, it's saffron, right? So even though there are regional parties in power in different states like Nagaland and Meghalaya, they are in alliance with the BJP. So here, the MNF, which was in power, was not in alliance with the BJP in Mizoram per se, but it was a part of NDA. So here, after a long time now, we have a non-NDA party which has won. And the ZPM has strongly been saying that we will not join any kind of power formation which is rooted in the center, and that, we are going to be this authentic regional voice. We're yet to see what happens. Throughout its campaign, the Congress had kind of attacked ZPM and the MNF in the same breath, saying that, they are regional parties, they are susceptible to tying up with the BJP, and they're going to be an inroads for the RSS in the state. That was largely what the Congress's entire plank was. So this is a non-NDA party which has been voted to power in a northeastern state. So we are yet to see now what happens on that front.
And next we talk about malaria, which kills around 6 lakh people every year and is considered one of the deadliest diseases in human history. The disease, which is spread through mosquitoes, has been on the rise globally for some time now. However, this has not been the case in India, where cases have been on a slow decline. And this is what the recent World Malaria Report, released last week by the World Health Organization, highlights. According to the report, India witnessed a decline of 30% in malaria incidents and 34% in mortality in 2022 compared to the previous year. In this segment, we speak to Anonna Dutt from the Indian Express about the possible reasons behind this decline and the significance of the report. Anonna, tell us how big of a concern has malaria been for India?
So for India, it is quite a bit of a concern because we see malaria cases increase every year after the monsoons. And over the years, the numbers have come down, but we still contribute a significant number of cases and deaths to the global burden. So India is among the 11 high burden, high impact countries. So these are countries which have significant enough number of malaria cases, and interventions could lead to significant decline. So India is among these countries, and what is challenging is if not treated on time. So if you receive timely treatment, it can be just a fever, for a few days and it'll get okay. But if you don't get treated, there are chances of the malaria infecting on your brain and, finally leading to death. So it is a significant concern.
And you mentioned that cases in India have been declining. Has that been the case globally as well?
So if you look at the trends worldwide as well, around 2000 to 2010 is when we saw quite a bit of decline, and then the progress sort of halted. There was a stagnation in the numbers. It would come down a little and then go up again. So it was almost the same for around 10 years. Then when the pandemic hit is when we started seeing an increase in the number of cases. And now the global total of 249 million cases is more than what we had in the 2000s. So we've crossed that in the last 3 years of pandemic, whatever gains we had made during the early 2000s.
And is that because certain services and important interventions weren't available during this period, during the pandemic?
So yes, that has been the case with most diseases globally. There has been a resurgence because of two things. One is the health systems being busy with the pandemic. So diseases other than that wouldn't get the kind of attention that it did otherwise. And the public health machinery completely being busy with the control of COVID-19 meant that, services such as looking for mosquito breeding, spraying insecticide, providing more bed nets to reduce mosquito bites. All of these activities sort of halted across the world during these 2-3 years, which resulted in a resurgence of these mosquitoes and the pathogen.
Right, and now we're talking because the WHO has recently released the World Malaria Report, and one of the significant things about the report is that it says that India saw a decline of 30% in malaria incidence and 34% in mortality in 2022 compared to the previous year. And again, this is happening right after the pandemic. So what stands out to you about this statistic?
So this is following the trend that we saw in the last 2-3 years. India has been seeing consistent decline in the number of cases over the years. And it is a little surprising to me because whatever the world faced, as in the challenges with, the healthcare systems being busy and the interventions not happening in time, that is something that happened even in India with COVID-19. So it is surprising that didn't impact the number of cases. In fact, 2022, we saw a significant decline from the 2021 numbers, even though globally an additional 5 million cases were reported. So it is a little surprising, but that's what the report says.
And do we know why that might have happened? Why we have seen such a significant decline in India?
So I spoke to a few experts to get an idea of how we are able to control the numbers. And one of the reasons has been that, availability of point of care testing where, even the ASHA workers can go door to door and test someone for malaria if they have certain symptoms like fever, chills, etc. Then a focus on the primary health care. So, if you do get diagnosed with malaria, you can get your treatment at the primary center instead of having to travel somewhere far off for the medicines. That has been one of the mainstays, and the government is also trying to, bring in more of the private players into the program. So that has been one criticism of the government program so far for malaria, is that while in India, huge proportion of almost 80% of the healthcare is provided by private players, they're not the ones reporting the malaria cases to the government. So that has been done. Then another important factor is surveillance. So with now digital records being maintained by even the PHCs and ASHA workers, we have a more sort of real-time data on where the cases are occurring, and we can plan ahead. We can, have control measures in place, do insecticide spraying and tell people that, prevent mosquito bites in an area where malaria is happening. All of these interventions can help in reducing the numbers.
And Anonna, one big challenge when it comes to malaria is that it is connected to climate change. The fact that temperatures are rising, humidity in certain areas are increasing, which is a very fertile ground for mosquito breeding. Could you talk about such challenges going forward, even though according to this report, we are seeing cases decline here?
So this World Malaria Report was the first one to actually take a look at climate change, and it has a separate section on the impact of climate change on malaria. And one of the examples that was mentioned was the Pakistan flooding in 2022. So, out of the 5 million additional cases that were recorded in 2022, 2.5 million were in Pakistan. And that was a huge chunk of extra cases in Pakistan. And that was mainly due to, people getting displaced and people living in areas where there was water logging during the floods. So climate change has a significant impact. I mean, that's a direct impact where you have extreme weather events, which is what we're seeing India and globally, that the frequency of, say, flooding, extreme rainfall, cyclones, all of it is going up. So these create conditions which are conducive for the mosquitoes to breed. Other than that, there is changing temperature. So, for example, if you look at the, Himalayan regions, those were traditionally not places where mosquitoes would breed a lot because of the cold temperatures. But now that is changing. So, I mean, I'm not so sure about malaria data, but there is a dengue map of the country which shows that in 2001, there were just 8 states where dengue was happening. And by 2022, it spread to all of the states in India. So there is clearly a spread of the vector because of, climate change. And then there are indirect impacts, climate change resulting in events which restrict your access to healthcare facilities. So even if you think you have malaria, you do not get diagnosed and you do not get timely treatment, which then leads to deaths. So all of this has been talked about in the report this year.
And you also mentioned in your piece that the other challenge with malaria is that people are now developing drug resistance. Could you speak to that concern?
So for India, actually, there are 2 challenges. One is that we are traditionally a country which has a significant proportion of vivax malaria. So if you see the 10 other high burden, high impact countries, most of them are in the African continent and they have a higher burden of falciparum malaria. Now, of course, falciparum does lead to more, say, effects on the brain, but it is also very easily treatable with the malaria pills that you would give. When it comes to Vivax, it is a 14-day treatment, and if people do not take that 14-day treatment, then there is a significant chance of relapse. The Vivax malaria knows how to survive in the liver of patients, and you would feel like your symptoms have gone away, but there will be repeated relapses if you do not take the full treatment. And the treatment for the Vivax malaria is also something which not everybody can take because there is a gene deficiency. If you have that, then it can be quite life-threatening for you. So you have to test for that before giving the therapy. So there are these challenges when it comes to Vivax, which I think accounts for 40% of our malaria cases. Other than that, yes, the artemisinin is the backbone of malaria treatment, and everywhere across the world, people are reporting that increasing resistance to the therapy. So in that case, we'll have to start looking for other anti-malarial drugs. Other than that, we also have insecticides, and we have to keep changing, upgrading the generation of insecticide because the mosquitoes are getting resistance to it, which is what we saw with DDT. So malaria was set for elimination in 1969 when DDT was very effective and working very well, and then it failed because of resistance.
And in the end, we give you an update on India and Maldives ties. On Sunday, the Maldives President Mohammed Muizzu said that India had agreed to withdraw its soldiers from the island nation. However, a few hours later, sources in New Delhi informed that the issue was briefly discussed in Dubai, where Muizzu met with Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the sidelines of the COP28 summit. Now, as many of our listeners may recall, last month, just a day after Muizzu was sworn in as the new president of Maldives, he had requested the Indian government to withdraw their military personnel from the country. Sometime back when we had spoken to the Indian Express's diplomatic affairs editor Shubhajit Roy, he told us about the extent of India's military presence in the neighboring country.
In the last few years, India has sort of gifted 2 helicopters and 1 aircraft to essentially the stated objective is to help with disaster relief and as well as medical evacuations. So that is what India has been using these military platforms for in Maldives, and they have been stationed now for a while.
And there are a total of 77 Indian military personnel in Maldives to manage and operate these aircrafts. And Shubhajit told us that India and Maldives defense and security cooperation goes back years.
It has been there for many, many years. If you remember in 1988, there was a coup attempt against then Maldives President Abdul Qayyum, who was the president for 3 decades. So he survived the coup attempt because India sent troops at that point of time on the ground. So India has had a very deep security and strategic relationship with Maldives because its neighbor, which is in the maritime corridor, which it's a maritime neighbor as well. And there are the strategic significance of Maldives is very, very significant. Apart from that, Maldivian defense personnel are trained in India as well. And since it's a neighbor, so obviously India turns up to be the first responder in whenever crisis or disaster hits Maldives. For example, a few years ago, there was a water crisis, drinking water supply crisis. So India immediately had rushed drinking water to Maldives.
Apart from defense and security, India also shares strong economic and people-to-people ties with the island nation. However, despite this close relationship, Muizzu came to power riding on the opposition's India Out campaign and defeated the former president Ibrahim Mohammed Soli, who was known for being friendly towards India.
If you see, Maldives has, since democracy, in the sense that a multi-party democracy came into being in 2008, there have been, every 5 years, there have been changes in government. So elections have taken place every 5 years, but there have been sort of a lot of political volatility has been witnessed. India has obviously worked with all the political parties, but some political parties have been much more favorable towards engaging with India. Some have chosen the path to engage more with China, or if I would say that, they have been playing the China card as part of the diplomatic toolkit. Abdullah Yamin, who was in power between 2013 to 2018, he quoted China much more aggressively than any other government before. And under him, in fact, Maldives joined the Chinese President Xi Jinping's Grand Belt and Road Initiative. And after Yamin lost the last elections, President Ibrahim Soli came to power, and he was seen as much more towards strengthening relationship with India. And with the current president, sort of what happened was in the last couple of years, there was a political movement on the ground which was led by Abdullah Yamin's party, which called for India Out campaign. And their single focus was getting these military personnel out of Maldives. So the India Out campaign made Yamin's alliance opposition very popular, and they won the elections. But what happened was Yamin was convicted in a case, and since he could not contest and he could not become the president, Mohammed Muizzu is now the president and is seen as the proxy of Yamin. So that's the context in which Mohammed Muizzu has made this formal request in his first meeting with an Indian minister after taking oath, after taking charge. So that's what has happened, and that's how the Muizzu establishment has made this demand early on in their term.
Now, while the Ministry of External Affairs had not officially responded to this request, according to sources, both countries are engaged in a discussion on how to keep the Indian helicopters and aircraft operational in the country. In fact, after the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Muizzu in Dubai, both sides have decided to form a core group for this purpose. However, Shubhajit had said this request raises geopolitical concerns for India, especially considering Maldives' strategic importance and the fact that Muizzu's party has favored China in the past.
Any strategic footprint of China in Maldives is of concern to India. So India obviously would see any withdrawal of military personnel and increase in Chinese sort of activity, military or otherwise or political, would be seen with concern and suspicion. And so it will have diplomatically challenging tasks at hand. So it will have to navigate and deal with the current government and current players, stakeholders in the military, in the civil society, in politics, and will have to navigate these choppy waters that Maldives now poses.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. It was written and produced by me, Utsa, Sarmin, and Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it and share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.